Hi, welcome to the Car Chat podcast. I'm Sam Moores, and with us today we have Charles Fawcett. Hello.
Hello. Hi, Sam. How are you?
Very good, very good. Can you tell the audience a little bit about sort of who you are and what you do?
Yes, Charles Fawcett. I'm based up at Thirsk in North Yorkshire. I'm in the old cinema right now, which is the showroom in North Yorkshire for Twisted Automotive. Twisted is a company that I've had for 22 years now. Actually, half my life.
Wow.
I've been Mr. Twisted, for better or for worse, almost. Twisted started up here in Thirsk. We're initially a Land Rover parts business. So we developed a number of tuning products for the Land Rover Defender mainly, some of the old Range Rovers and Discoveries as well. But more recently, the last sort of 10 or 12 years, it's been all about building Defender and trying, where possible, to make them the best they can be. So we ship vehicles all over the world for all sorts of different people from all walks of life. And Defender is a common conversation. It's a leveler, which allows us to speak to all sorts of people about it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those cars that, like, a bit like a classic Mini. Defender's one of them. All sorts of people are interested in them. You could have an insane garage, or you could have one Defender. Like that could be the thing. So let's go back a bit. Were you working in cars before all of that? Have you been a car nerd and a Defender nerd forever?
Yeah, my family business was motor trade. My dad bought and sold vehicles all my life. I remember coming home from school one day. I think I was about 8 years old, and there was a little Suzuki 55 wide pickup in the drive, and he said in his broad Yorkshire twang, "By the time I've had my tea, lad, you want to be driving that?" And he basically chucked me in the seat and went and had his tea. And from that day on, anything he came home in, I was very fortunate. We grew up, we rented a farmhouse on a working farm, and from the farmyard, there's a track up the side of the field. It was maybe only half a mile long, but there's an old cinder track, and I must have pestered him so much. Every single vehicle he came home in, it was, "Dad, can I set that up the track? Can I go over?" And at 11, 12-year-old, it was Saab turbos and Renault 5 turbos and anything interesting. He didn't buy and sell normal vehicles. It was always something different. So I was really fortunate to grow up with cars, around cars, learn a lot about them. We had a little paint shop at home. We had a little workshop, and I came across some really interesting vehicles. But I guess my passion for Land Rover came a little later. I think I was 11 when I got my first Land Rover. I bought a Series 3 109 from panel motor auctions. My father would never give me any money, but he'd help me along with helping me buy and sell things. And I think the first car was a Renault 4 that was 30 quid, and I'd ragged it around the field for years. And I remember the cows eating some wiring under the dash. And anyway, we sold it for profits a few years later. And then it was a Mini pickup. Then it was a Suzuki Jeep, and it went on. And I got this Series 3 Land Rover from Panel Auctions. Panel was renowned then. They used to have a banger sale on a Tuesday night. And I think I gave £111 for this Series 3. It was missing and coughing and spluttering, and we took it home. And I sort of stood and watched while Dad made it work again. And that was my field car for a while. And a little later, my father started an off-road driving business, so driver tuition in Land Rovers.
Yeah.
I was rubbish at school. I had absolutely no commitment to school at all. So at 17, I was given the option of, I think they said 40 hours a week of homework or leave. And there was no way I was doing the homework. So I had a Daihatsu 4-track at that time. It was turquoise with some big BF Goodrich tyres on it, and I used to howl around town in it when I was supposed to be in lessons. So I left, and I think I left on the Friday, and about an hour later started work for my dad, just literally doing anything. Polishing cars, dropping cars off, picking them up, moving trailers around. A little bit of paintwork here and there, all sorts of stuff, typical motor trade. But the off-road driving business, we used Land Rovers. At that time, we had some Camel Trophy 110s that had been used in the Tanzania Burundi rally. I wish I still had them. We used them as tuition vehicles for quite a lot of years, and I sort of slipped into looking after this off-road business while he did other things. And so I was just around Land Rovers every day, off-road, on-road, seeing how fast I could drive them, seeing what tyres made a difference. And eventually we were presented with an opportunity with some tuning products for these vehicles, and we tried them out, we used them, we did a bit of competing with them. And these things just absolutely blew my mind, the way you could make a Defender that previously had, I don't know, 111 horsepower or something, and you used to have to pedal like mad to make this thing, get somewhere in a decent time. Suddenly you could plug something in or plumb something in, and this thing had 150 horsepower or something. And it was like night and day. So that clearly got me very excited. And all I wanted to do was make them go faster. And that really was the start of Twisted. So just always been around them, always used them, always enjoyed them. I've been broken down at the side of the road many times. I've nearly crashed them. I've nearly been on my side in them. I've done all sorts of daft things with them, but they're just I think probably the first thing I said is they're a leveler. It doesn't matter who you are or what you have or where you're from. If there's a Defender around, it quite often becomes the conversation point. And I guess Twisted is just an extension of that. The vehicle is it's so endearing at any level. So a bit of a strange background, but it led me to this point.
Yeah. When you were doing all the like off-road tours and stuff, were they like pretty good and didn't need much maintenance and whatever, or were you constantly like fixing stuff and sort of putting them back on the road?
Yeah, I the Camel vehicles, we dragged their life out as long as we could. But in reality, they were unreliable from day one. They were 200 TDIs from 91, so they had rear drum brakes, and I don't think there was a day where all of the brakes worked or the handbrake. There was always something. But later on, I opted to buy new vehicles, and we started with 300 TDIs, and in fact, the first new one we bought. We were all absolutely over the moon at having bought this Rioja red, Portofino red 300 TDI 90 hardtop. I think it was 16,242 quid or something new then, plus that. And I had a bit of a fallout with my father and had gone off in this thing. He'd only done 200 miles and I'd gone off to take my girlfriend out or something at the time. And he played war with me for taking it. So I took it back. I didn't want to talk to him, so I took the keys behind the visor and left. Sadly, it wasn't there the next morning. Somebody must have seen me put the keys behind the visor and run off. So it had disappeared. He rang me the next morning. Where's my Land Rover? Anyway, that was the first one we got. It lasted 2 weeks. But then we bought a couple of new ones every couple of years for the off-road business. And they got worked really hard. So they'd be in mud 3 or 4 days a week. They were, used quite hard between sites and, all sorts of drivers from all walks of life behind the wheel, with and without experience, and very often in seriously muddy conditions. And you'd get about 6 months of reliable time out of them. And the next 6 months, you'd change the brake pads probably once a fortnight and a few bearings here and there and a few ball joints, drop out ball joint, things like that. But in the second year, you would be changing brake pads almost every day.
Why?
Just the mud is like a grinding paste. And unfortunately, once the first set of pads caught the metal, the discs are scored and you end up literally just wearing the next ones out.
Yeah.
But the main reason was they never dried out. So they're in mud.
Okay.
In fact, a farmer friend of mine had a theory. He had a quad bike and he'd had it years and he'd never, ever washed it. It had never had a bearing. It had never had any brakes in it. He said it's just ultra reliable. And his theory was once the thing's cased in mud, water doesn't get in anymore.
Right.
And the heat of the thing moving dries it out, and it's ultimately reliable. But we would be driving through mud all day, pressure wash the hell out of them at night. They'd sit cold overnight, wet, and then be back in the mud the next day.
Yeah.
So things would just fall apart. And after 2 years, you'd go and part exchange these things with 8,000 miles on them. You know, they sound like the perfect Part X. 8,000 miles, one owner from new, and absolutely knackered. So we had to swap dealers quite regularly.
Yeah, I was about to say, did they see you coming and be like, no.
Yeah, in the end, we didn't get to Part X them. But they're just, I don't know. There is just something about Defender. It's a way of life, really.
So you're doing this, and then you're buying and selling cars.
Yeah, Dad was always buying and selling. I didn't do much of that. I'm not really a motor trade sort. I don't like the hard sell. I like to produce something that will sell itself, that people want, and that's probably another reason for Twisted. I just decided that if I made it good enough, I didn't need to sell it. It would in principle sell itself, you know. So for a lot of years, I was almost the reverse of sales technique, you know. But fundamentally, if you do it right and you get the right person sat in it, you don't really need to do a lot of selling.
Yeah, they tell their mates about it.
Yeah, that's the theory. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so. How did the name Twisted
come
about?
Well, everyone would say, "What you're doing? What you're making Land Rovers go faster?" You know, it's a bit twisted. It didn't really make a lot of sense.
Okay.
That's one of the stories, and I'm sticking to it.
Fair enough.
Not a lot of logic in it, really.
And then, so you started Twisted, and you say you originally were putting parts on.
Yeah.
Cars.
Initially it was half of my desk. So in the off-road centre, I had a desk in the porter cabin. I remember moving the office. I was based at the garage where Dad used to sell his vehicles from, and I had a little office there, and I used to run the off-road business from there and journey to the site. And eventually I said, "Look, Dad, if we buy a porter cabin, put it on the site, I don't need to travel back and forwards." And that was in probably 99, I think, 98, 99. I spent 2,600 quid on a porter cabin, a little office in one end, and a little meeting space. And at that point, Twisted took up half my desk. The other half was the off-road business. And then I needed a bit more space, so I took all the Twisted stuff home. And in reality, what I was doing then was I was having pipes made and exhausts made and intercoolers made, and I had these little chip boxes that we used to import from Holland, and I just created a range of tuning products for Land Rover. And we were mainly a mail order business. So we would sell a lot of parts from the Land Rover magazines. It was too early for websites at that stage, albeit I think we probably got one in maybe 2000, 2001 or something. But it was just selling parts that we'd had developed. And every time they just worked. And as you said, you know, Bob would tell his friend George, and George would ring up, "Can I have some of these? And can I make mine go a bit better than Bob's?" And it just becomes this sort of journey. And then you meet a customer that sort of says, "Look, you know, I want these bits, but I can't fit them. My local garage won't have a clue what they're doing. Can you fit them for me?" So maybe I'd fit them on the drive, or maybe I'd get, you know, the local garage to put them on for him. And while he's there, he's saying, "Look, actually the suspension's a bit, you know, it's a bit choppy, or what tire would you fit?" And it just evolves mainly through customer interaction. They challenge you almost, and I was never one to say no. So, you know, a few years down the line, we've gone from it being on half of my desk, then it was in my Wendy house in the garden at my little rented cottage, and then it took up the half of my lounge, and then I moved house and it was in my double garage. I used to have the courier come every day, actually, to my house. I lived in a little cul-de-sac, and this van would turn up every day, and every day I was late packing parts. I got to know the delivery drivers so well because they'd stand there 20 minutes waiting for me. But it was all the parts were getting shipped out, and we used to send them all over, literally all over the world. We supplied a lot of the bigger Land Rover parts businesses as well for quite a long time. And in essence, what we did was we took a series of parts, we packaged them up, we gave them a name and an identity. So rather than somebody having to ring up saying, what can you do with my Land Rover? They might say, hey, I've seen that you do a tornado exhaust, or you do a this or a that. And I felt if you gave it a name, it gave it an identity, it was a much easier thing to talk about. So it was all mail order. And as I say, we transitioned into fitting parts. 2006, I built the first vehicle. I say built, the first full sort of package modification I did on the drive at home. And I think 2007, I parted ways with my father. He carried on doing the off-road business, and I wanted to be purely Twisted. Got a little unit on the industrial estate in Thirsk. A really decent old chap, Roger Hall, allowed me to take this industrial unit without a lease. He kind of dropped it on the desk and said, if you want to sign it, it's there, but, So
nice.
Just really relaxed. And my bank manager lent me some money unsecured. And I was then on my own. And I was in a position where it had to perform as a business.
Yeah.
And eventually I got, I think it was a chap called Dave, first of all, came to work with me doing a lot of fitting. And then a real old mate of mine, Gary, who actually still with us now, albeit he nicked off a couple of times to work elsewhere and came back. Gary joined us, and I think maybe a year and a half in, we eventually had enough money to buy a ramp. And it just sort of evolved, really. And I guess the reason I'm most proud of it is because there wasn't some great big pot of cash at the beginning. There was no, golden checkbook. It had to do its job. It had to make money to be able to evolve and grow, and it's always done that. So it's my baby, really. It's half my life. I've had this little business. So.
Yeah, that's cool, and that's exactly the opposite of what you see on like Dragon's Den and stuff like that, where people come in and they go, "I've already spent £1 million and we don't have a product and we've done nothing." And I'm like, okay, cool.
I think I actually wrote to Peter, what's he called off Dragon's Den? I wrote to him once.
Peter Jones.
Peter Jones, yeah, that's him. I did write to him, but he didn't reply. He probably thought another nut job.
So you're doing these packages, and were you sort of aiming to create like a certain sort of vehicle at the end of it, like angled towards a certain purpose, or was it just here's a bunch of stuff to beef up your car?
Everywhere I looked at the time, it was all about off-roading. So people would buy a Land Rover, and they in their mind, it was the hobby vehicle that might also transport the kids, or might also tow a trailer, or might purely be for the weekends. And they were using this vehicle once a month, once every other month, to go off-roading somewhere at a pay-and-play site or green laning or something. So they were giving it great big suspension lists, big snotty tyres, side exit exhausts, big bumpers at the front and the back, and winches and roof bars and all these things. But while driving on the road, this thing was awful, and nobody would admit it, but a vehicle set up for off-road is not a nice road vehicle. So what I didn't see in the Land Rover market at all was people making them more comfortable, making them a bit quicker, making them a bit quieter, making them a bit smoother. This just wasn't happening. So that was the gap that I felt we could slot into. So we started with performance. Performance clearly covers many things, but we spent a lot of time on suspension, a lot of time on brakes, a lot of time on soundproofing and different types of materials, and then moved into all the other things you see now. But the reality was, the Defender was either a workhorse or it was an off-roader. There was nothing in between. So I wanted Twisted to stand out as doing something different.
Yeah.
The reality is now, everywhere you look, there are people making Defender better for the road, but there certainly wasn't back then.
Yeah.
It was quite different.
Yeah. And talk me through the process of what's the sort of development that's gone into these things. But if you're going to build a car for someone, what options have we got? What is the car like now, almost, versus 15 years ago, 10 years ago? What's the change? That was about 5 questions in one, unfortunately.
Yeah, the premise is similar, but I guess customers' appetite has perhaps changed. Product offering is different now. But in reality, if I went back to that first one I put together on the drive, it was for a farmer. He lives an hour away. I met him at a Land Rover show. He polishes his tractors. He powder coats the rims every year. He stores them all inside. He cleans them after he's used them. And his Land Rovers are the same. He ended up with a huge diesel Bowser. I think he could tow 2,000 litres of diesel around to fuel his tractors. And the Bowser was painted to match the Land Rover, and it had the same wheels on it. And he just, it's a workhorse. It's therefore accepted. Doesn't matter, as I say, who you are or where you're from. If you turn up somewhere in a Defender, you're cool, you're fine. Or you're not noticed. It's one or the other. So he wanted this thing to be super luxury inside. He's a farmer that only occasionally wears wellies. He likes to get out of his Land Rover, get in his tractor. His tractor's clean, his Land Rover's clean, and he was prepared to spend a lot of money doing it. And he's probably had 5 or 6 vehicles from us since. He's still a customer now. He's a great friend of the business. And I now can't remember what the question was.
It was sort of basically, what are those builds? How have they changed?
So the premise hasn't really altered. As I say, customer appetite has. So we might now put a 500 horsepower LT V8 in there with an 8-speed auto and long range tanks and roll bars and racks and what have you. And if back then it was 100 hours of labour to put a car together, now it might be 600 or 800 or 1,000. There's one of our guys, Johnny. He's been working purely on 2 vehicles for one customer for the last 15 months.
Okay.
And every day of the week. So the workshop in Thirsk here, where we build everything, we've got 11 guys, 10 ramps, 11 techs, 11 engineers. There's obviously a support structure around them, but these guys have their own ramp, their own space, and they will start a vehicle and they will finish a vehicle. So they will strip the vehicle, they'll take everything out of it we don't want, throw that away, bring in everything we do want. They'll test fit everything, they'll build it back up. Very often it's down to the ground, everything on the floor, nuts and bolts. Right. Chassis might be galvanized or powder coated or undersealed. Bushings, bearings, brakes, suspension, shafts, CVs, flanges, diffs, axle casings are coated, body goes off to be painted, interior disappears off to be trimmed, the different engine comes along, the different gearbox comes along, and all the ancillaries and bits and bats to make that all work. Gradually gets built back up. They can be on it for hundreds and thousands of hours at times. And I think the commitment they show and the approach they take is they don't want production line, because production line they don't feel any reward from.
Yeah.
Production line is arguably more efficient. One man that's good at interiors, another man's good at wiring, another man's good at mechanical. But the reality is they want to build a car from start to finish and be able to put their name on it. They all have their own little name badges that they hide on the vehicle. They don't even tell us where they put them. So sometimes the customer won't even see that. Very often the branded components that we make, the branding is hidden. So a customer might grab his door handle, he can feel the branding, but no matter where you put your head, you can't see it.
Okay, yeah.
He knows it's there, nobody else does. The brand appears in subtle places, but we're building one, for example, just now for a customer, and specifically he wants no branding. So we've had to regrind wheels, change steering guards, change door handles, change dial packs. Wheel nuts. Our wheel nuts are branded on the shank. He doesn't, it can't be seen, and it's not because he doesn't like the brand. He wouldn't have come to us if he didn't like it. He just doesn't want anyone to know that's what he's got.
Yeah.
So it's a really personal thing that we're doing. but it's not necessarily always about these 500,000 hour builds. I've just had a couple come in the showroom just now, visiting on holiday from Birmingham, and they just want advice on what seat to fit and what position to put it in, because he's tall, she's a little bit shorter, and we've lived and breathed these vehicles for so long. I'm not saying we are the absolute experts at all, but we know our way around them, and we know what works and what doesn't. And I think going back to the beginning, where I felt we could fit was, rather than going and buying an intercooler from this man, an exhaust from that man, a suspension system from that man, and a steering wheel from that man, I wanted to create one place that had actually tested all these things, that know what works and know what doesn't work. Because you know only too well, if you're modifying a vehicle, it's all too easy to pick the wrong product to go along with another one. So these things all want to be tested and used and sampled, and that is what we do. We only build Defender, and have done now for a lot of years. All the techs have come pretty much from Land Rover, pretty much. A couple of guys, one guy from Bentley, one guy from Nissan at the minute, but they're all of the same mind. One of our longest standing techs, Nick, he actually came from a window company. He was making wooden windows, and he fancied a change, and he'd been there for 22 years or 23 years or something, and he fancied a change. And his eye for detail is incredible. He sees things that other people don't see. He didn't, in fact, it was probably a wind-up, but he failed a PDI one day for a guy because the front number plate was 2 mil lower on the left than the right. It was possibly a wind-up, but he just sees things people don't see. It's cool. Yeah. I don't think the other guy did.
Yeah. That must be quite interesting from bringing in people from different industries. I don't know whether you've had much of it. Like someone, like you said, someone who's working on Windows or something, their look, like the way they're going to look at stuff is going to be different from someone that has worked at, JLR on XYZ. They're sort of formed into a certain process throughout their life. We all look at stuff differently. Have you found that that's sort of like added to the end product by having a mix of people?
We're in rural North Yorkshire, so there's not a great pool of automotive bods, but nor does that necessarily work. I think there are two roles in the business that we've never successfully filled for long periods. One is the management of the parts, the other is the management of the workforce. We've had so many people come through those roles from automotive background, and they just do not get it. If you try to put a time in motion study in place here, none of it makes sense. But the way that these guys build these vehicles, you can't mechanize it, you can't standardize it. It's got to be personal, and they do it their way, and it works. It creates at times little issues. One guy might route a wire that way, another guy might route it that way, but they do it for a reason. And we've kind of just got to let the guys have free rein to be the best they can be. If we've got a workshop manager cracking the whip behind them, it just doesn't work. It's a very, very personal thing. And we can spend hours, I'll use Johnny as the example again. I always use Johnny. He's right in the middle of the workshop. He's been with us a long time, but Johnny will spend hours each week talking to his customers. And you can't charge for that. You can't, it's just part of what he does.
Yeah.
And it might be that they've decided they want to put this widget that way around, or they want to put it that way up, or they want to put a little something there. And it can't really follow a process. It can't really be standardized, because what we do is really personal.
Yeah.
So going back to your question, it's more about the right mentality. The way that you do the work, the way that you fit something is easily trained, but the mentality can't be trained.
Yeah.
You've kind of got to be a little bit OCD. Yeah. And actually, I sometimes wish we could have a film crew in the workshop, because the funniest of things happen mainly based around how far on the scale somebody is, but being on that scale is what makes them have that attention to detail.
Yeah.
I'm probably off the scale.
I think certain industries and certain jobs, it's massively beneficial. I'm like that around certain stuff, and it annoys the hell out of some people. Like, you're doing something and you're like, look, come on. Like, that's just not quite right. You're like, look, if you just turned it 2 degrees to the left, it would line up. It would be great. And they're like, why does it matter? And you're like, because I can see it from across the room.
Yeah, but nobody else can.
And other people can't. And then you're like, hang on a minute, is there much point in this? But I think those sorts of attention to detail is massively appreciated. You can't necessarily, a lot of people won't necessarily appreciate the one thing, but they will appreciate the sum of that level across a bigger project.
Yeah. An example I use quite often in the mid 2010 or 11 or 12 or something, Land Rover on Defender, when they were producing them at that stage, they stopped fitting a wing washer. I don't know what the part's called, but we call it a wing washer. At the bottom of the front wings, there used to be a 3mm washer, which leveled the front wings. And if you look at Defender, it's the easiest thing in the world to draw, because the headlight panels are 50% of the size of the grille, and it's all boxy. And I noticed one day that these wings were now drooping at the bottom, and it wasn't square anymore. So we had to investigate, and sure enough, Land Rover had saved themselves 40p a vehicle by not fitting these wing washers. And at that time, it was probably a 3-hour job to fit these wing washers. Anyway, we got these particular wing washers made with a little slit in them so you could slide them in. But all of our vehicles, the wings are straightened. It's the silliest of things. But if that's not done, when you look at it, it's that 2 degrees out that you're talking about. It's just not quite right. And I'm not saying that we always get it right, because we don't. We're people. We're working with a flawed product. Defender is, in every sense, flawed. The lads, towards the end of production, I got to do a couple of tours of the production line, and I remember the guy that was straightening the doors up. He was given 2 minutes a door, so 4 minutes. He had a rubber mallet, a Torx with a ratchet on the back of it, and a knee pad. And I'd have hold of the door, his knee was in the middle of it, then he'd bang it with a mallet and slam it 5 or 6 times, and you could obviously hear when it was slamming correctly. And then he'd nip it up, run around the other side, do the other one. Our lads, they can spend 8 hours lining a door up. But that guy could only line his door up right if the other 2 dudes further down the line had fitted the bulkhead in the same place. Yeah. And if you look at standard Defender when they come off the line, they are never the same. They are entirely different every time. And it all starts with the bulkhead, then the rear tub. And if those are millimetres out, by the time you get to the other end of the vehicle, you've got 1/4 of an inch of a problem. It is a flawed product, and we are still working with the original architecture. We're using the original chassis. We're using the original panels. I'd dearly love to do a twisted version that didn't have all these flaws, but it's those flaws that make it endearing. So we iron out as many as possible. We get rid of as many of these quirks as we possibly can. But the reality is, it's still a Defender. Yeah. And I do think we just need to keep a little bit of that. I call these things Defenderisms. I don't really know where the word came from, but it came out a few years back, and it needs to have some Defenderisms. Otherwise, it might as well just be any other car. Yeah. There's got to be a click from the indicators. There's got to be a clunk here, and handbrake's got to click when you put it on, and it's kind of what we love, really.
Yeah. Have there been any because I feel like you hear stories. I've heard the odd story about a Defender, and it's got a spanner still in the door that's been delivered, and I don't know whether that's actually happened, but have there been some funny stuff you've come across that's just pretty
all the time? Under the bonnet of one a few years back, popped the bonnet, did a bit of stuff, and had a look, and in the gutter at the back behind the bonnet was a little water channel. It was like a 10-inch screwdriver with a red handle on it. And he'd obviously just left it there and shut the bonnet. We had one come through once, and it had gone through Land Rover's PDI and then the dealer's PDI, and the whole run of bolts along the rear crossmember that hold the tub to the crossmember, they were completely missing. It wasn't a single bolt in a single hole. But when you're stripping them down, you'd lift the carpet out, take the seat out, and there'd be a bolt there, and you kind of stick your head like this and go, have a look up. Oh yeah, it came from there. There'd either be a bolt in it, and they'd dropped it, lost it, and put another one in, or there was a hole. But no, they were terribly, really badly built. We bought quite a lot at the end of production, and we've still got quite a lot of them. But no two are the same. You look down the left-hand side of one, and there'll be this much tyre showing. You go to the other side, and there'll be this much tyre showing. And one of them, there'll be a gap next to the seat box where you could drop a mobile phone through. The other one, the gap's not there. So they just vary. The variables in trying to rework these things are huge.
Does that make that's presumably when the staff come into their own? Because if you're just trying to design a sort of repeatable product, if the base is not the same, it's a bit out each time, that must cause a lot of problems.
I learned this quite early on. I came across an intercooler manufacturer, and he was like you and I, a absolute attention to detail, second to none. He built this intercooler. I tested it. I loved it. And then he made a jig, and he showed me the jig, and the jig was a work of art. And this is where he would jig his intercoolers for us from. So we'd had this one, we tested it, we loved it, fitted it on my vehicle, and then I ordered 10 from him. And I think the first one I shipped to Germany, and this guy rang up, Charles, it doesn't fit. Like, I've seen the jig, I've tested it fits. No. And we quickly learned that you couldn't have round holes on things. Okay. You had to have elongated holes because the thing you're mounting to varies so dramatically. And you're absolutely right. The guys in the workshop, they are aware of all these things, and they just deal with it just as it happens. It's fine. Rarely now do we come across something new. But the average guy who is used to more of a production line just doesn't understand it at all.
Yeah. And so if I was going to come to you and order a car, what's the process? How does this work?
We like to get to know the buyer. We like to know how they plan to use it, what they want to do with it. Right. If they come in and say, look, I'm thinking about buying a new Porsche Cayenne, but I notice that yours are a similar amount of money. Can I see yours? The best thing he can do is buy a Porsche Cayenne. If he wants a toy, if he wants a cool vehicle, if he wants something that is completely understated, totally personal, that he will fall in and out of love with daily, buy a Defender. You ultimately adore them, but they drive you potty sometimes. I drive a German 4x4. And I drive quickly everywhere, and it does great MPG, and I never really have to think about what I'm doing. It just goes wherever I point it. But if I'm going for a special evening or to a special event or going out with the kids for a bit of fun, I go in a Defender, because that's just, the things make you smile. It's one of the few vehicles in London where people actually flash you out the junction. Or they stop for a chat. Often, in fact, I was in London a few years back, and I pulled up a set of traffic lights in the centre of town, and I was on my phone. Shouldn't have been. Very naughty. I was on my phone. Met police pulled up next to me. Drop my phone. Literally drop my phone. This policeman looks at me, and he goes like that, puts your window down. I'm going to get in trouble here. Put my window down. And he goes, has he got a V8 in it? And all I wanted to do was talk about the Defender. And that's pretty standard. Go back to that farmer customer I told you about. He said if he wants to go out and be incognito, he goes in the Bentley. If he wants to go out and talk to people, he goes in the Defender. He said you fill up with fuel, they want to talk to you. You stop at the shops, they want to talk to you. It's great to understand the person, what they're going to do with it, how they want to use it. We can then kind of start to tailor the thing. There's no point setting up to do that if they want to do that with it. So we spend a lot of time talking, a lot of time getting to know the people, a lot of time understanding how they're going to use it, and then we'll start to recommend things. And there's kind of a standard Twisted build. There's a way we do the core products. That's our basis for everything, and whether it ends up being electric, V8, little petrol, or even keeping the old diesel. This kind of a core underpinning. If we get those things right, the car's going to be right. From the ground to the steering wheel, from the ground to the pedals, there are so many moving things in Defender and so many things that can have been torqued up differently or can have a little bit of wear on them. There's a way of driving one. We try to keep that analog experience, but iron out all those little things on the way up so that when you actually get hold of a steering wheel, it actually feels like it's going to go where you want it to go. And when you touch a brake pedal, it actually tells you it's going to stop. The standard one doesn't necessarily do that. It's just 1,000 little things that transform this into something that you can really enjoy on that day out. And if you chose to drive one every day, and we have customers that do, it's absolutely fine. You've just got to be a little eccentric, perhaps, to drive one every day, because there are so many better cars. But it's like having an MGB or an E-Type or an Aston. It's not an everydayer.
Yeah.
And I guess these days we try not. I suppose because it's gone out of production, it's not available anymore for every day. So people think of them less and less as everydays. Go back 6 or 8 years, people would say, I was going to get a Disco 4, I was going to get a Land Cruiser, but I think I'm going to get a Defender 110U. I can put it through the business, I can get my VAT back, get me, right down on my corp tax, do a few mods, and it's cool. So they'd kind of quantify it that way.
Yeah.
But it's now a classic, and I think it's getting treated that way. People more and more are buying them because they really want one. They want it to be the best it can be, and there's not much in between. So it's they end up coming to Twisted.
Yeah, that makes sense. From if you'd said to me, I don't know, 5 years ago, when you could still buy a Defender, could you still buy a Defender? When was the last production?
January 16.
Okay, so in 2015, you're like, you want a 4x4, etc., and I'd look at all the options that they go. You could have a Defender. Personally, I'd be like, yeah, okay, but like, no. I don't understand. That does not look like a car that was built this year. If you compare it to all the other cars, you're like, it's missing all the tech, the ergonomics are crap, all this sort of stuff. So you're like, nah, it doesn't make any sense. And it's the same with, I would say, like nearly new certain supercars over time. They've come out and they've not made sense. They're a bit crap. Maybe it's like the Lamborghini, I don't know, whatever. And it's not that great as a car, but if you go 10 years down the line, everyone goes, okay, it's not a new car anymore. So you don't treat it like a new car. You don't compare it to the other new cars. It's actually just something a bit interesting. And if it's got quirks, that can be part of the character. Whereas if it's brand new with a warranty, it kind of has to work and do all the stuff. And I think
this is transition time for that product. For the Defender is in transition. It's we said it was an instant classic the day they stopped building it. Prices soared. They doubled and tripled in value at times. It's still in people's memory, so it's still quite sensitive. It's still quite close to being. When Land Rover brought the new Defender out, that was a great milestone for us because it's clear that that's the modern Defender. And this old classic thing was, clearly not production anymore. But it's still in people's minds. It's still fairly fresh. But the further away from production we get, the more classic it becomes. And I think while they were in production, you had to be a certain sort to want to drive one every day. Clearly, lots were used for utility companies, and they were workhorses. I saw one today on the side of the motorway. It was dragging it was a tree surgeon, and he had a load of
chipper on the
back or whatever on the back, chipper on the back or something. So people are still using them for work, but it's becoming quite different. They're not thought of now how they were, and I think give it another 5 years, it'll be a super classic. But they are, and always have been, something that they put a smile on your face when you drive them. You look at all the classics; none of them make sense really. if we're going to box it off as a car, we would all drive the same thing, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Because it just gets you from A to B, and you'd base it on economy and comfort and refinement or something.
Yeah.
Defender, classic car, they don't fit in that box at all. So you've got to be on a scale somewhere to want to be in them regularly. But I think the lifestyle that surrounds Defender makes it a pleasure.
How did something that because I'm not in the sort of Defender sort of space. Like I've not been a massive fan. I've sort of appreciated it from afar over the years. But when the new Defender came out, there's sort of the stuff you sort of heard here, everyone was saying, was, you get a lot of people being like, oh, it's now too expensive, and blah 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 blah, and then you'd hear the sort of counterpoint of going, well, who's buying it? And there was always I feel like there was a lot of people that were moaning about the fact that it's changed, who weren't necessarily going and buying new ones. Was that true in your experience, or not so much?
JLR had a challenge, and their challenge was to recreate something that had been in people's hearts for 60 years. While Defender itself didn't come around till sort of 1990, that shape has been with us since 48. To recreate that was always going to be a huge challenge. What they've created is a brilliant new car. I think if their marketing and PR machine had not tried to sell it as being a natural progression, if they'd not added in a few Defender quirks, if they'd just said, look, we've created a new car, it's the bomb, I think it would have been easier to accept. I think if they'd not called it Defender, if they'd called it Defender 2, it would probably have helped. But there is this huge aftermarket for classic Defender. And a lot of these people, no matter what you said to them, you know, they would not drive a Toyota Land Cruiser. It had to be a Land Rover. It's got to be a Land Rover, you know. They wouldn't drive anything other than what they have. And because they are so involved in that, when somebody says this is the new version, they are just going to hate it. Give it time; they'll get used to this new one, and it'll be fine. But the reality is, JLR weren't aiming at those people. JLR were aiming at a completely new audience, and using the history of the Defender to give it some legs. But what they've made is a brilliant new vehicle. And at some point,
I think it's really good.
I'll buy one at some point, and I'll use it for towing, and it'll be a great truck. I wouldn't have wanted to be them at that stage trying to replace that product at all. No,
big task. And I think they've done well. I think they've done really well. There's like 3 on my street.
Oh, they've sold so many of them. It's insane. I always said we wouldn't work with it. I said, no, we're going to stick to classic Defender. The reality is, at some point, we'll do some cool stuff for new Defender. We just have to do it. It wouldn't be commercial not to. We are a business after all, but we're also a shed full of die-hard Defender fans. Yeah. So, you know, the transition takes a while. But yeah, they've sold so many. It's been a great success for them. It's a cool car.
Yeah, it is. Has that almost revitalized the classic, now I'm going to call it classic Defender, a little bit because of all this more attention, or do you think that not had so much fun?
I think we saw the first 3 or 4 years after the end of production, we saw this huge uplift in demand for classic Defender, which naturally hiked the prices. That then made it quite easy for JLR to introduce a new Defender at at that point, at less money. Yeah. You know, if a classic one was 60 grand or 70 grand or 80 grand, the new one was 50 or 40 or 60. You know, it looks like very good value, really. I think probably when New One came out, Classic Defender leveled, possibly dipped a little bit. I think all this news about the Grenadier, the other product, which is it was going to be a British-made natural successor to the classic Land Rover Defender. I think it's ended up being made in France or somewhere. That as well will take some demand away from Classic Defender. But the reality is there's a finite supply of Classic Defender. They're not building anymore.
Yeah.
You pay a lot of money for a good one right now, and they're only going to go one way in value as supply lessens.
Yeah, presumably good cars.
Yeah. Well, it runs through them all.
Yeah.
You know, stuff that was $5,000 6 years ago is 15 and 18 and 20 grand now. You know, you would argue that the lower value ones have seen a bigger uplift percentage wise than the new delivery mileage stuff. But it's an interesting space to see it moving around.
Yeah.
But we'll never see anything like it again. It's physically not. It's not possible to build something like Defender anymore.
No.
It doesn't make sense. I remember going down the production line about a week before the end of production, and they stopped the line because a vehicle had a fault. It turns out it was one they were building for me. And there's like 6 engineers looking under the bonnet trying to work out which pipe was the wrong way around or something. But I actually met the 2 boys that fit the bulkheads, and their job was to fit bulkheads all day, every day. Woof, 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 bulkheads. And they were a pair of absolute characters. I got them to sign the chassis as it went past them. And it was all about the people. Whereas the Range Rover line, I think the optimum for the Range Rover line was a vehicle every 48 seconds or something. You know, I think on that day they were 1 minute and 10 or something. But these vehicles are just off the line, whereas the Land Rover line was about every hour and a half something would pop out the other end.
Yeah.
It was a totally different process. And there's a lot of love for that, isn't there?
Yeah, I think so. And if I was working in a factory, I mean, I don't know, but if I was working in a factory, this shift from, you know, you're at your car, working on one car for, well, one, it would have been you would have built the whole thing. And then it was like, okay, you're at your station for 4 hours. And then it's like hour and a half. And then it's like, no, 30 minutes. And then it's 20 minutes. And then someone else does the next little bit. And then there's a robot. Like that must be, I mean, mentally like challenging the smaller that gap gets.
You wouldn't be able to work in that factory because you'd be trying to straighten everything up.
Yeah. Definitely not a JLR one.
Stop! You're 2 degrees out.
I might be okay in a German factory.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I don't think I could do it.
Yeah. No. So right, in terms of the models you offer, you do the base car, which has a certain level of work, and then actually, as these now get older, presumably you're going to have to start doing more restoration as well. Yeah.
Restoration is quite different to what we've done in the past. Mostly we would start with a new vehicle in the past.
Yeah.
Take it apart, put it back together how we want it. Restoration is kind of body goes to the left, chassis goes to the right, engine and running gear in the middle, and then it all comes back together again. It takes up more space. It's different logistics. A lot more remedy work. And a lot more labour intensive.
Yeah.
We're still working with new vehicles. We've still got a stock of new undriven vehicles to work from, and we'll continue to work through those.
It's a nice asset to be sitting on, actually.
Yeah. It was quite a juggle when we decided to buy them.
Yeah.
Quite comical, really. Land Rover, one of the guys from Land Rover Corporate called me and said, you know, Charles, you've had a few cars this year. Do you want to put an order in before the end of production? I said, probably do. I don't know what I want. And then the dealer called me, Ripon Land Rover at the time. Howard, what a character. Charles, yes, my friend, you know, do you want to order some cars? I said, I probably do, yeah, I don't know what. And it kind of rumbled on for a few weeks. And then I got a call from this dude at Land Rover, and he said, Charles, there's a policy meeting, and we're going to stop supplying modifiers. And if you don't get your order in, you're not going to get any cars. I'm like, oh, right.
Okay.
So I think I was in the car coming up the M40. I think I was with my father. And I literally scribbled, and I've got it somewhere, a tiny little piece of paper in a tiny little pad, and I scribbled sort of, right, January 10, February 15, March, and I got to 240 vehicles. And at the time, we were building about 60 a year for customers. So I thought, well, that's 4 years. By the 4 years, by the time we've got rid of them all, the new Defender will be out, and we'll do something with that. So I penned an email on this BlackBerry I had to this dude at Land Rover and said, can I order? And I ordered 6090 hardtop, 6090 station wagon, 6110 Utes, and 6110 station wagon. I said, I don't know what colours I want yet, but I want them all to be XS, and this is the quantity. And can I have them monthly over the 12 months from January to December of 15 when you stop production? And he replied, he said, Charles, thank you for a brilliant order. And that was that. And they all went quiet for about 3 months. And then I was invited to a meeting at the dealers. And the call was, rather than Charlie, it was, hello, Mr. Fawcett. Can you come for a meeting? I said, yeah, of course I can. Yeah, no problem at all. Why are you calling me Mr. Fawcett was my first thought. But anyway.
He wants money.
Off we went. Well, off we went to this meeting, and I'm sat there in this room full of faces I didn't recognise. Howard was in the corner, who I'd always bought my Land Rovers off. And this other dude from Land Rover, I recognised him, but there's a load of suits I didn't know. And this guy came from nowhere and said, right, Mr. Fawcett, yes, a cup of tea, pour this silver teapot, cup of tea. And, right, so these vehicles that you were talking about having, I'm thinking this is not going where I thought it was going to go. It just seems that we haven't quite got the capacity to build enough vehicles, and so you're just going to have to go and buy them wherever you possibly can. No, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? I've been waiting 3 months for you to confirm, and we're 3 months further in, and demand's increasing, and they're getting harder to find. What do you mean you're not building enough? Well, we just, and they kind of waffled on. And then he used this term, what was it? Frustrated contract was what he said. I'm thinking, that sounds like a legal term. And, I'm just a simple Land Rover bod. I'm thinking, that sounds legal to me. Better stop this meeting here. So off I went. And I got a bit of advice. And the advice was, you've sent them an order. They've replied to your order. They've said, thank you for your order. That's a contract.
Yeah.
So I went back to them and I said, we need these cars. We're relying on you supplying them. It's the backbone of our business. Anyway, they tried to stop us having them because clearly demand had increased. They didn't want to sell them to us. And that was kind of the start of the fallouts with the manufacturer, which have gone on and are still going on now. But eventually they backed down and they said, yeah, okay, you can have your cars. So I then had to scurry off and try and find some money. And then the next thing was to try and find out where the hell to store 240 Land Rovers.
That's quite a lot of space.
It was a lot of space, yeah. We ended up with about 40,000 extra square foot to put these things in. We got an old ammunition store, concrete bunker, and an old horse arena locally, because I didn't want them to be far away. I wanted them to be local. And the second to last month of us collecting vehicles, we picked up 40 this particular day. And they'd all landed at the dealership. And it was actually 5 months after the end of production at this point. Because they argued with us for 6 months, they had to shift our order along 6 months. So they were still storing them and delivering them to us 6 months after the end of production.
Right, yeah.
So then we ended up with a load of 16 plates registered months and months and months after production ended, which is quite cool in itself, actually. But I pulled up at the dealership. We'd given them £1 million or whatever for these 40 vehicles. And they'd obviously checked the bank account. The money dropped in. And they met me at the door with a cardboard box full of keys. There you are. And then another 2 cardboard boxes with handbooks in. There you are. They're in the back, and they're literally we had to help ourselves. Some had fuel in, some didn't. Some had been PDI'd, some hadn't. They were really unhappy that we'd got this order. And we kind of sat on as many as we could, but clearly as a business we had to churn through them. We had obligations to funding and so on. And I think we're left now with 50, 55 or 56 untouched. And it's really cool to see them now, so far out of the end of production.
Yeah.
They're all just sat there, polished up, looking lovely. And I'm just trying to work out what to do with them, really.
Yeah. So, because presumably they're worth more than, I don't know, they're worth more than you paid for them. Definitely box fresh.
Yeah, they don't really exist. You can't really buy vehicles like that now.
Yeah.
There's 32 of them, which is it's every colour from the end of production in the 4 main models. So 90 hardtop, 90 station wagon, 110 utility, 110 station wagon, in the colours they produced in 2016. Those as soon as I got the order, I put lines through all of those and said, no, we're not selling those. I want to keep those. I'm gonna do something really special with them. I've just not decided what yet.
Yeah.
But it's cool to see.
That is cool.
Yeah, you couldn't do it again. Imagine if you'd bought, I don't know, a batch of Renault 5 turbos before they stopped, or it's just something. I can't think of another example, but if somebody had a shed full of undriven classic minis right now, all lined up, that would be cool, wouldn't it?
It would be cool. All the different colors, all the specs. You sort of hear that about, sort of collections in other countries where someone's bought one car in each launch color and then it's just sat in the dust.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I should probably get a really big dusty old barn and just let them gather some and then just open the door in 20 years. But I like to see them.
But with this, you're going to have to do a bit more restoring of bodywork as clean, untouched cars. I know you've got a few in a garage that you can sell to people, but you're going to have to do more work. Is that actually going to make the cars? Presumably that will actually make the cars more expensive, annoyingly, because it will possibly be more work than the price of buying a nicer car.
Yeah, I think labour is one of the dearest elements in a sense. So yes, it makes it a dearer process. But there's one way to do the job, and that's do it right. And there are many times we'll write off a huge amount of labour in a build just because we want to know it's gone out right. And it's as much as about our pride in what we're doing as it is about making a buck. The easy way to make money is to not have the pride, churn them out, make quick, easy money, but we're just not into that. A car will stay here so much extra time because we, as people, aren't happy that it leaves in that format. So, there's a little bit with, we always inspect before we start a vehicle, and we'll say to the customer, look, we found these 6 other things that need doing, or there's a bit more corrosion here than we were expecting, or there was one yesterday, actually. I've just come back from a few days off, and I spoke again with Johnny, and we were looking at the chassis. He's got this car stripped down, and it's in for a big job. And he said, Charles, I just don't want to coat this chassis. I want to take the last few bits off it. It's an extra 4 days labour. But if we do that, we can then blast the chassis, we can then coat it properly and then put it back together properly. And it's going to be a call to the customer. Just say, look, we really want to do this extra bit. And it might end up being we don't charge for it, but it just makes sure it leaves us right. If something's, particularly if it's going abroad, you don't want it coming back, do you?
Yeah.
It's just a matter of having the appetite and the energy to do the job right and then work out the finances afterwards.
Yeah. I've heard this sort of theory on buying a sort of box fresh, let's say classic. So something that's been in a barn, it's done 0 miles, and it's untouched, and that they possibly drive slightly differently to a fully restored car from the same time that's done 50,000 miles or whatever. Have you noticed anything in Defender? Let's say you've done one that was like older, a bit more beaten up, versus you've taken a box fresh one and done it. Could you tell the difference?
Of course you could. We when building a vehicle, make so many changes that it could never be compared to a box fresh. The bushings are different, the brakes are different, the suspension's different, everything's changed. So it has a different style. But if you were to take a 50,000 mile one that's been used every day and the one that's not been driven, the 50,000 miler will probably feel better, albeit probably a bit more clunky, than the brand new one. But that goes right the way back. I remember we would buy them new and drive them, and at 10,000 miles, it was literally like somebody just released everything. They felt great, and that was a standard Defender.
Yeah.
If at 8,000 miles it would do 92, when it did 10,000 miles, it would do 100 miles an hour. It made such a difference, and they just felt fluid and free, and they were better on fuel. And the nature of the vehicle, it's hand built. Every bit of that vehicle is reliant upon the person on the line doing things exactly to tolerances. They never ever did.
Yeah.
They were, if they got out the wrong side of bed, they would either over tighten or under tighten. It was as simple as that. They're just people. And you would get in one Defender and get in another, and they were entirely different, even as brand new. Those 2 Camel Trophy 110s we had, probably shouldn't say this, but I remember I used to, going down the A1 when it was 2 lanes towards Wetherby, there was like a bit of a hill, and one of these things would drop down to like 55 miles an hour, and we were always late. So you would push it with the other one, get it up to 75, and then drop back. And it was because one went better than the other, and they just always did. And then, but the one that was slower handled better. You could chuck it into a corner and it would stick, whereas the other one on the old Michelin XCLs, it would wander and feel awful. They are entirely different every time. So box fresh and used, while comparable, I think it's just normal that something with such basic engineering and basic mechanics, it frees up in time, and it's like an old slipper. Really, you get used to them. I've got an 07. It was the first Defender I managed to pay for, and I could say it's mine. It took me 2 years. I put it on finance with Lombard or whoever. A few £100 a month, got a balloon at the end, paid it off. Yes, it's mine. A bit of an achievement.
Yeah.
And I said, as a result, I'd never sell it. It's probably only done 40,000 miles now, but it's done 26 laps of the Nürburgring. It's been to Santa Pod, it's been to Brands Hatch, it's been to Liddon Hill, it's been on all these tracks, it's been on 2 wheels, it's done all sorts of stuff. It's had a hell of a life. It's now pride and joy, sits in my garage, I use it on a weekend. It is literally like an old slipper, and it feels wonderful. It's never had an engine. It's probably had a clutch. It's probably had a transfer box. Diffs have probably been swapped. It's not quite Trigger's broom, but it kind of, they start to feel that way if you're not careful. But it's just wonderful. But it has quirks. It has little rattles. It has little squeaks. I don't want it to be perfect. I want it to be what it is.
Yeah.
A very pure driving experience.
That's quite fun. So at the moment you do 3/4 engine options.
Yeah.
Run me through
the LT V8. LT V8's the new General Motors V8 crate engine with an 8-speed GM box. In packaged format, when they leave us, 460 odd horsepower. Our test vehicle's 517 horsepower. It's got too much power for a Defender soft top.
I drove this the other day.
It was, out of town, it is bonkers. It's got too much power. It's lethal, but thoroughly good fun to use on a twisty back road. Customer version, about 460 horsepower, torquey as hell, quick as you like, not that bad on fuel. A Defender is it's 2 boxes with some wheels. They're not good on fuel at the best of times. Drive a 2.2 diesel with a trailer behind it, it'll be down to 16 to the gallon if you're lucky. So 18 or 20 to the gallon out of a V8 is quite respectable. That engine is amazing. The 8-speed box is amazing. It suits really well. Huge amount of development gone into making it work. Getting the position right, getting the props in the right angle, and making it feel like it was meant to be there is quite a challenge. That's kind of, is it flagship engine? It's the big one. EV, we call it the TVE actually, vehicle electric. But EV, electric vehicle, developed in Holland for us. I didn't want to like it. I actually love it. Brilliant around town, brilliant on the open roads, pulls like a steam train, quiet as you like. Get to 50 miles an hour, you don't know you're in an electric vehicle. You could be in a diesel, petrol, whatever. Because the road noise, the wind noise, everything else takes over. You got no sensation from beneath. 120-ish miles range on a full charge, 3 hours to charge or just less than. It looks OE, it drives OE. I think the one you tested, the lock stops hadn't been adjusted, so it was about a third of a turn less than normal when we finished with them. But I love it. I think it's a really cool product. The TVS is the latest engine, the one I'm probably most excited about right now, because it feels like a natural progression for Defender. It's 307 horsepower, standard 6-speed manual box, really torquey, really, really drivable, loads of power when you want it to have. You can wring its neck or you can poodle about. It's a quiet 4-cylinder turbocharged petrol. So those are the 3 engine upgrades, but naturally there are still people that want the original 2.2 diesel. We modify it and run it up to about 174 horsepower. Oodles of torque, that works really well. 6-speed manual or 4-speed auto. So there's still a bit of that going on as well. But people are sort of migrating away from diesel slowly. And I think while the EV is phenomenal, it has its limitations. I think if it's a toy, if it's a leisure vehicle or a town vehicle, or it's worked locally, EV will work.
Yeah.
V8 is because you just want the wildest you can have. But I think actually that TVS, that's probably the thinking man Defender. You know, the guy who wants to be a little bit conscious of not driving a diesel. He still wants to work it. He wants to get in it and feel like a Defender. It's still got to have a gear change and all the sort of standard Defenderisms. But more power. That's a great option, I think.
Yeah, it was funny. You earlier you were saying how a Defender's always it just seems to be a talking point, and so I drove the 3 different versions when I came to see you the other day, and when I took out the was it TVS, the 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, we went round the corner, pulled up at some lights. I think I sort of gave it some beans for a little bit, and then the car next to me round round the window and was
story.
like, "Oh, mate, that sounds so good!" And he wanted a bit of chat about turbo cars and stuff, which was really funny because it makes a sound that you don't expect out of a Defender. Equally, so does the V8, which sounds pretty ridiculous. But one of the things I think I noticed straight away, because I was just mooching around town, was it's actually really quite refined and not loud. It just makes the burbly noises until you step on it. Which a lot of, I feel like the old V8 that you used, or the previous V8 used to use, was quite just like, all of the time.
The previous was the LS. We did the LS first of all in 2012. Yeah, late 2012 we started on it, finished it early 13, and actually took it on Gumball. In fact, that's probably where we first met, was it?
Yeah, I think so.
Probably bored at the Russian border or something, waiting to get through. So, yeah, that was the first one we did with the LS engine in. That was the 480 horsepower version. The stock crate motor's 430. They did a fairly heavily cammed 480 version. And we foolishly used a Tremec 5-speed manual. First was kind of over there. Second was somewhere back there. And it would do, that car, it was a 110 station wagon. It would do 48 miles an hour in first gear. It would do 74 in second, 110 in third, and about 130 in fourth. Fifth was pointless, really. But the worst gearbox and clutch combination for driving around St. Petersburg and Warsaw and all those other places where you needed to be on and off the clutch all the time. But yeah, I did 4,800 miles in that in 10 days, rang its neck. It was brilliant. And then we put them into production, and I think we did 96 or 97 of them in the next 9 years, up until us starting with the LT. The LS was a brilliant engine. We never had one fail. We never broke a driveline. It worked, but it was noisy. It was quite rude. It was quite ostentatious at times. You couldn't be discreet in it. Yeah. So our learning from that was this new LT. It had to be subtle. It had to be really gentle on the throttle. The LS was pin sharp on the throttle. The moment you touched it, poof, wants to be away. LT, we spent a huge amount of time mapping. And honestly, LS, the first one we did, we developed everything ourselves, learned a lot, tripped ourselves up a few times. Then we did another one with a slightly different gearbox in it. And by then, there was a few other firms had done bits as well. And we kind of brought a few bits of a few other people's stuff together with our own and ended up with a conversion. But the reality is we didn't develop that entirely. We couldn't afford to. We didn't have the time to. And there were more economical paths we could take. LT, from start to finish, we've controlled the development. So, you know, the billet components to fix the thing together, the mounts, the bushings, the mapping, the cooling pack, every bit of it is twisted. In essence, we've got more time to do it and more money to do it this time. So, you know, we could own every bit of it.
Yeah. And
therefore mapping to make it quiet in traffic, exhaust, so that it's not in your face and noisy. We could do a lot more with it and spend a lot more time on it. And I think what we've got is a product that is super fun, wild if you want it to be, but relatively subtle if you just want to potter about, which I think is a great bit of middle ground.
Yeah.
There's a bit more induction noise now. It was all about exhaust before. We're more about induction now. So the driver gets more involved, but the people around him don't necessarily notice it.
Yeah. No, it felt like a very refined but mad product. Like,
yeah.
I think when I got out of it, I was chatting in like, this is you in podcast mode. I was saying, if the sort of refinement level in terms of the driving of, you could very slowly reverse it round a corner up a hill. And it wouldn't make loads of noise, wouldn't be going any of that stuff, and it just did it. And you're like, okay, yeah, this will tick the box of being able to just drive it and not cause those problems. In terms of how has the uptake been? When did you launch that model? That was recently. Was that recently?
Yeah, literally in the last few weeks. We've built 6 customer vehicles quietly in the background.
Okay.
The first couple were people that understood that this is going to be an evolution. It doesn't just work from day one. We've done a lot of running around to keep on top of that. We've learned a lot with every vehicle we've built. If we're just building a stock standard vehicle for somebody, we always do 500 test miles anyway.
Okay.
But with these V8s, we're doing a huge amount more. And our team over in the US, so we've got licensees in the US and the Middle East now, building twisted vehicles, and they've done a huge amount of development over there. But what we soon learnt with the work they're doing over there is the end product finishes up different,
right?
And the environment in which it's used is different, and we have different wants and needs to their customers. So while there's a kind of a core development gone on, we've kind of done this along the way. Right, we'll probably end up coming back to there eventually, but there's been a lot of learning and some really interesting testing done. But the reality is we're still a small firm, and we have to. Everything's got to be. It's got to make commercial sense.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of learning as we go, but a lot less this time than there was last time. We are at least in control of the product this time.
What have been some of the things that have been sort of picked up that are different from, let's say, States and Middle East? Because presumably Middle East, they drive in a lot more sand than we do, which probably causes more problems. But like, how has that, customer base and shift affected the cars?
I think as much as anything, it's about the customer's expectation of the vehicle. Mm-hmm. The Americans have never really had Defender. Yeah. So they perceive it to be a very different vehicle, and they don't have they've got no history to work on. They don't know what to expect from it.
Yeah.
So they might want paddle shift. They might want lightning fast gear changes. They might want loads of noise. But over here, there's a want to have it built exactly how the customer wants it, and for them to be able to use it how they want to use it. But they also want to try and keep some of its heritage and history, and keep it in a box. And I think Middle East is different again. The products they fundamentally finish up very differently. That core twisted sort of underpinning, but the end product is very different. The guys in the States really want something almost stand out, where over here it's almost the opposite. It kind of wants to be a little bit under the radar.
You want to hide it, debadge it.
Yeah, it's getting more and more like that as well. It's if something's shouty, it doesn't really work over here now. It stands out too much.
Yeah, you don't get let out of junctions as much.
No, you don't. No. Albeit with all that power, you just dive out anyway.
Go over the verge, side of the road, use the off-roadness.
I did that the other day. I was out with Nick. I mentioned Nick earlier. He's the guy that came from the window firm. And we went testing. We went up the A19, up the dual carriageway. And as I'm coming back, I'm watching the fuel gauge. I'm thinking, we're getting really close with this as to whether we're going to get back. And about 10 miles before we got back to work, it starts chugging. And he kind of looked at me. He's like, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, Nick, I think we might run out of fuel shortly." He's like, "Oh, for God." And I start wagging the steering wheel. And this is something my father taught me years ago. When trade vehicles, you deliver them with as little fuel as possible. So the last few miles you'd be weaving down the road, so it picks up that last little bit of fuel. Well, I swayed this bloody steering on this 110 for about 8 miles. And it just kept going, and the chugs got a bit bigger, and the chugs got a bit bigger. And I said to Nick, "Should we come off at this junction or the next one?" "Nah, but we'll push on to the next one." And we got to this junction, and as we're coming down the slip road, I'm thinking, I just hope there's nothing queuing at the bottom of the slipway. Anyway, sure enough, there's 5 or 6 cars queuing. So I said, "Hold on, Nick," and we went up the grass, round the back of all the traffic cones, round the back of this telegraph pole, and then literally rolled onto the fuel station forecourt. You literally couldn't do that in any other car. One, you would upset everybody that was queuing. But two, you'd have broken something. But because it's a Defender, they're like, "Oh, it's just a Defender. It's fine." They'll be the local farmer.
I it must have been on Gumball. I remember getting to a petrol station, and whoever was driving, it could have been you, just like rolled into the petrol station, over, curbs, everything, boom, 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 straight up. And you're like, yeah, obviously, that's the Defender. That's what they're going to do. That's how they roll.
My pal Matt, he drove. So we had 4 vehicles on that rally. Tony Hawk took one that we'd built for him. Tony Hawk, Mike Escamilla. Is he rooftop? I think he is. The BMX dude. And the guys from MTV Brazil, I don't know if you remember them, Lucas and... Anyway, the crazy guys. Brilliant fun. And then my pal Matt and his best pal Ollie, they drove another 110 for us. And I remember Matt telling me this story. And in Poland, do you remember if there was roadworks, they wouldn't put traffic lights up or anything. They'd just put some metal trunking through the grass and out the other side. And you'd kind of go around really slowly and back up onto the road.
Yeah.
Anyway, he said he was flying down this road in this diesel 110 as fast as it would go, and then all of a sudden roads closed and there's this metal trunking, and there was some form of supercar like pottering through it, because obviously he didn't want to damage anything. And he said, I passed this thing about 70 miles an hour on this metal trunking, fully sideways, trying to keep hold of this Land Rover. In fact, the same guy, we got black flagged at Brands Hatch for drifting. We took this Land Rover of mine down there to a race car live event, and first lap out, I can't remember which the corner is, but you come down the hill, left-hand corner. He pitched it in. Well, we were full opposite lock from about 80 yards before the corner, right the way through it, out the other side, and immediately got black flagged. And these marshals were like, "You're drifting, you can't drift." And Matt was like, "I'm not drifting, I'm just trying to get around the corner." And we've got this amazing set of photographs of Matt literally fully crossed up about 70 miles an hour in this Defender. And again, coming back to the whole Twisted story, Twisted seems to have brought people to it who are so passionate about what we do and the Defender that they've carried us in many ways. You know, Matt was a customer. I met him at Brunton Thorpe. He heard our TD5 exhaust system or what? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he drifted past us in a hold, and 2 minutes later, he's in his old blue TD5. He heard our exhaust, bought one, and then bought lots of bits. And he's become a really great friend. And anytime there's driving to be done, Matt comes and does it. Nobody ever asks for any money. You know, it's just what we do, and it's kind of, what am I trying to say? It's the Defender conversation that leads on to other things. And we've met so many amazing people and built so many incredible vehicles. And it all comes back to the same thing. It's Defender. It's just a cool lifestyle to be around.
Yeah.
And, you know, Matt, as an example, he won't drive his every day. He probably doesn't drive it 10 times a year, but he will never ever sell it. It'll always be his baby, you know. I remember getting a call years ago from a guy. He must have rung me 7 times over the period of a week, and I was always just too busy to have a conversation with him. And eventually he got hold of me. I was driving somewhere. I chatted with him and just broad Yorkshire speak, told him what was good, what was bad, what he should, what he shouldn't do. And eventually, toward the end of the call, he said, yeah, okay. He said, I want one for the road and I want one for off-road. And I want one to do this, one to do that. I said, yeah, fine. And then he mentioned something. I said, no, you don't want to bloody do that. No, do it like this. Anyway, he said, ping me a quote. If I like it, I'll buy him. So pinged him a quote that evening, and he replied that evening. I said, I'll have him. And at that time, it was a big order for 2 cars. It's 2010, I think. And I replied, I said, great, thank you. I only knew it was Faris. Thank you. Just send us your contact details for sending you an invoice. It was the King of Malaysia. And I'm literally just talking to him normally like any other bloke. Yeah. And I probably should have been watching my P's and Q's and all the rest of it. But do you know, he's had so many cars off us now, and you know, he sends us text messages and pictures of what he's been up to. And what I'm trying to say, I think, is Defender is just a leveler. And if the 2 parties are passionate about that product, it's great. You know, we have a lot of fun doing what we do.
Yeah, that's fun. I think that is a great point to start meandering slowly into the end of the podcast, which is the five questions.
Oh God.
Do you have, we may have come across it already, but do you have a most memorable driving trip or journey?
Like the odd one I shouldn't talk about. Do you know what? I always come back to Gumball. What an experience.
Yeah.
I got a phone call from a guy, and he's selling me the virtues of Gumball 3000 and how we should get involved as a Yorkshire manufacturer or whatever. And it turns out this guy, he was in London, he was Maximilian's kind of right-hand man. And it turns out this guy's dad was my dentist. So we couldn't not do something. We ended up sponsoring it. We had our name on every car. And, you know, we're this little dot of a business in Yorkshire, and we've only ever seen Gumball on TV. And it's like aspirational. And to be able to take part in it. And all right, everyone else flew the cars or transported the cars. Yeah. We literally drove from Thirst to Copenhagen. And when we got there, we had to clean all the flies off and start all over again, you know. But that as an overall drive, I'll never forget it. I think I was hungover for 2 months. It was just phenomenal. Phenomenal. Just buzzing off the back of that.
That one, was that the one that went St. Petersburg and then back in?
Yeah, Copenhagen. Copenhagen, Stockholm.
Yeah. Somewhere in Finland.
Yeah, I can't remember. Was it Turku, St. Petersburg, Tallinn, Riga, Warsaw, Vienna, Monaco.
Yeah, that was nuts. That one, like, I've been on quite a few, and the Russian leg and the Eastern European legs were mental.
Do you remember driving? We obviously sat at the border for hours. In fact, I sold a Defender while I was sat at the border.
Nice.
To a mate of mine that was on the rally, Ollie. He's still got it now. But we were sat there for like 4 hours, and there's all this chit chat and rumors, and don't do this, don't do that, be careful what you say, don't look at them wrong, and blah, blah. And then we assembled at the opposite side of the border, and we went off in groups of 20 cars, I think.
Yeah.
Police car at the front, police car at the back. Well, as we're running along, police car at the front with his lights and siren going, one at the back. I was at the back, so he's right behind me. I remember a car came down a slip road and tried to join our group.
Yeah.
And this police car came from the back. Was it a Lada or a Skoda or something? Came from the back and basically pushed this guy off the road and then went back to the back of the queue again. We're like, this is mental. And they had every junction all the way in St. Petersburg was closed off. There was police or, a motorbike or a policeman or a car or something closing off every junction that I saw. And as we got nearer, the policeman was waving us on to go faster. We were doing, 70 miles an hour through St. Petersburg or something, and just encouraging us to hoon around.
And there seemed to be, I think there was like 3 or 4 convoys, and one of them, quite a few people came out of that convoy and was like, that was one of the most crazy, that was the craziest thing I've ever done. Yeah. And then there was one convoy which was just like, I don't know, they seemed to follow all the rules. But ours, we were doing like 100 on the wrong side of the road, behind a police car who was just like pushing the oncoming traffic, just like
get out the way we're coming through. Yeah.
And then, as you said, when you get into St. Petersburg, they literally just blocked all the junctions and we're like, just go full chat.
Yeah, what an operation! And there was a guy in front of us. I don't know what he was in, but he's drifting onto this bridge in St. Petersburg, and the policemen were just reveling in it. It was amazing. But then the next morning, having had all these warnings about don't stop, don't let anybody, don't do this, don't do that. Next morning, we get up, having had a late night in the hotel, and we just left to it. We're like, where's the policeman? Yeah. How do we get out of this place? But that was, what a trip. And there was, you'll remember so many little stories of so many cool things that happened. We were driving alongside, what's he called off Baywatch?
The Hoff, whatever his name is.
Driving alongside the Hoff. How are we driving next to this dude? We put the Knight Rider music on as we went past. It was just fun.
Yeah,
so that was a good one.
I'd say definitely memorable. Next question. If you could only drive one car for the rest of your life.
That's a really hard one.
There is a slight side point to this one. You're one car for the rest of your life, and you're allowed something that costs like £500 on the side. So you can have something that's like slightly practical and really cheap, and then you've got one car.
Do you know what? I think it would have to be Defender. I know that's an obvious answer, but it literally does everything you need it to do. If you surf, ski, row, cycle, climb mountains, walk dogs, have animals, tow trailers, it just does it all. And it's not the fastest, it's not the quietest, it's not the smoothest, it's not necessarily the coolest, but it just ticks every single box to a point. Everything else is limiting somehow.
Yeah, I get you.
My first, I was GT3 and I was Defender, and the GT3, I did that, and it didn't tow trailers, or it was a bit rude at times, or it insulted the odd person, or whereas Defender it just fits.
Fair enough.
It really does. Clearly, it'd have to be a twisted one as well.
Obviously, it's got to be a twisted one. What engine?
TVS.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That middle, the right bit in the middle.
Just works.
Most undervalued car at the moment?
That is really difficult. Come back to that one. Give me a moment.
Ponder. Most interesting car? What are you looking up? What are you Googling?
I spend a lot of time looking at, probably for most people, they're quite common cars, but I look at GT3, Touring, F12, 355,
tick,
even 430, just things that have soul.
Yeah.
They've got to be manual or V12. They've got to be... There are some really interesting cheap cars as well. Things that you're really engaged in driving, but I've got a real soft spot for an F12 at the minute. Never had one, never driven one. It just looks like something you would just want to keep forever. But Pip, my other half, she is GT3 with a wing all day, every day. I'd be GT3 without a wing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't get much better, really, does it?
All great options. I'm GT3 probably without a wing. F12 I totally see. About a year ago now, maybe. I was going to buy an F12. I've always just thought it was one of those like iconic designs, and it seemed it's got a point in its life where it was reasonable value. Ended up buying an 812.
Did you?
Slightly different, but ran that for 3 months, and then found out I was having a kid, so needed something with 4 seats. But that was a really interesting couple of months. Really, really good car, but it didn't quite connect with me on the level that like a GT3 does, in terms of it's a bit numb. But as a GT experience, amazing noise, loads of luggage space, waft around, but it's not something to drive really fast for me anyway.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I've had a few Ferrari and driven a few, and I've never connected fully. I think there is this charm to them, and they probably have Ferrariisms that drive a lot of people mad. You know, just
Shit
little
not
things
working.
that, But if you're that way inclined, you don't care about all that stuff because of what you're driving. I think the F12 is probably this appropriate middle ground that would probably suit my age, the age I'm at now, you know, where you see it as the car you go to Provence in, or, you know, the long journey or the nice dinner on an evening. But you're absolutely right. The GT3, you absolutely connect with. You feel everything. One of my biggest regrets is selling the one I had. My pal Ollie spec'd it, and his biggest regret is selling it to me, and my biggest regret is then selling it again.
Which generation did you have?
It was the 4-litre 991 Spot 2.
Oh, nice.
With a wing and a manual gearbox. And Ollie is very, very. If ever you want to spec a car, you ring Ollie. You don't look at the sheet yourself. Just ask him to do it, and he'll already know what you want before you ask him. But he spec'd this thing beautifully. It had all the right bits on it, and what we agreed afterwards, having both sold it, is we should have just borrowed it off each other.
Yeah. Just
done
it back.
I just pinged it back and forth. He actually went on and bought a touring after that.
Yeah.
And again, he probably regrets selling that, but that's probably one car, other than Pip and I arguing whether it should or shouldn't have a wing.
Yeah.
That's probably one car that if I could get back, I would. Brilliant piece of engineering.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And a nice blend of the this sort of old, because I mean they're not that old at that point, but like old and really new. You're still manual, but it's quite refined, but still has the nuts engine that's like when you put your foot down, it's really loud inside.
Oh, the noise that thing made. Just, phenomenal.
So
what
good.
A car.
Right.
And Defender and 911, sorry.
Yeah.
Defender 911 and Discovery or Range Rover is probably the garage.
Okay. Well, the next question is five-car garage.
Okay, well, it's F12, GT3, short wheelbase Defender, long wheelbase Defender, and a Range Rover. Sorted. Probably an RS6 if I'm allowed 6.
Well, no, you're not. But,
yeah.
And was there one you skipped? Was it most undervalued?
The
Did
most
you skip that?
undervalued. I find that one really hard.
It is hard. To be honest, right now, I think that really is hard, because I don't look at anything in the marketplace and go, that seems cheap or priced under what I feel like it should be. Everything's gone a bit mad.
It has. And how long will it last?
Unknown. I think possibly not necessarily undervalued, because they're not undervalued. If you can get certain new cars, we're at a certain point in time when buying a new car makes some sense, Whereas previously, I would say buying a new car never really makes any sense unless it's something super limited and special.
But for me, I think once supply catches up,
Yeah.
that bubble's going to burst in a big way.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. If you buy a new Defender now, or a new 911, or even a new Golf, it is worth more once you've picked it up,
or you lose
because
less.
nobody else can buy it. Well, nobody else can buy them. If you had that golden ticket that enabled you to go and get the new 911 whatever, or the new Golf whatever, it probably is worth more.
Yeah,
because you can't buy them. But once supply's sorted out, that can only go the other way.
Yeah,
I think that's where the classics come back. Yeah, we probably have. Yeah, you're probably right. But that's where classics come back, don't they?
Yeah, it will take time for the market for those cars to really come out and us to get back to a level where you could order it and it would turn up 2 months later. If you're sitting on a car that you don't need / don't want that much, now is a bloody brilliant time to sell it, as long as you don't need to buy something else, because it's got these crazy prices. And then who knows? 2 years' time, everything could have reset, and you can go, yeah, I'll get it for 20% less. Thanks very much. But who knows? It might not happen.
But it could be the other way as well.
It could be the other way around, exactly.
Be like me and Ollie with the GT3.
Yeah.
Should never have done that.
You make the best decision you can at the time, don't you?
Life's for living. You just make decisions and get on with it, don't you?
Yeah.
If we all pondered the decisions too hard, nobody'd get anywhere.
No.
You've got to live. There's a quote on the wall down here: "Be daring, be different, be impractical, be anything that will assert the integrity of purpose and imagination. Against the play it safe as creatures of commonplace and saves the ordinary." Cecil Beaton, and a customer of mine, John Lewis, gave me that quote, and he said, "Live by that," and he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Just make things happen. Have some fun.
Get on with it. Have some fun. Have some fun. That is. I think it's a great point to tie up the end of the podcast. Thanks very much for coming on.
Good to see you. Thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed it.